Well, the first thing that I would say is that I was very struck that Donald Trump announced that Douglas MacArthur was his favorite general. And I can understand the appeal of MacArthur to a lot of people, because especially when the United States is fighting another very limited war. You know, the war against ISIS is in some ways like the war in Korea. The United States clearly has the military force to defeat ISIS, just as clearly had the military force to defeat North Korea. But there are reasons that the United States has not brought all of its military force to bear against ISIS. But it does lead to frustration on the part of lots of people. You know, we are this great military power, and we spend these hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and we can't defeat this ragtag bunch of terrorists in the Middle Eastern desert. And so for Truman to say, we need more generals like MacArthur is natural, except that when Trump says it. But when he went on to say that, and he wouldn't have his generals giving interviews, well, that's when I say, he does not know MacArthur. Because MacArthur gave interview after interview after interview, and that was the whole problem. That's the reason he got fired by Harry Truman, because he gave too many interviews where he was saying stuff that contradicted what the President of the United States said. And actually, there's sometimes a misimpression that surrounds Truman's decision to fire MacArthur. And it wasn't as though Truman was, Truman did have a temper, there's no question about that. But he didn't fire MacArthur because he was mad at MacArthur, and he didn't fire MacArthur for insubordination because he technically didn't violate any orders. He fired MacArthur because MacArthur was deliberately creating confusion as to what American policy toward the communist powers was. And when the President of the United States would say, we're trying to keep this war in Korea contained and limited, and then the commander for American forces in Korea was saying, we need to expand the war against China, then the world got confused. And Truman decided, you know, I don't want the world confused because, and this is something that's also really important to keep in mind, and that is that Harry Truman was very sensitive to the possibility of nuclear war. More sensitive than anybody else, because Harry Truman held and still holds that unique distinction of being the only person in all of human history ever to order the use of atomic weapons during wartime. Now, Truman claimed in his memoirs and in post-war interviews that he thought very seriously about using the bomb against Japan, but when he gave the decision, afterwards he didn't give it a second thought. I'm not sure I believe that, and if I believe it, I'm not sure I like it, because that's a huge decision. I would like to think that Harry Truman spent at least a few sleepless nights over it. But I will tell you this, though, that he was very sensitive to the possibility that whereas World War II ended with the use of nuclear weapons, that World War III would begin with the use of nuclear weapons. One other sort of chronological coincidence here was that just months before the war in Korea began, the Soviet Union tested its first atom bomb. So from 1945 through, let's say, the Berlin blockade and the Berlin crisis, the United States could contemplate using nuclear weapons and not have to worry about having nuclear weapons used against the United States. But Truman understood that if the war in Korea somehow went nuclear, then the United States would be on the receiving end of Soviet nuclear weapons.